Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. New hat. This time around, I'm talking about Dune Part 2, and I'm also talking about a much older science fiction movie, which I watched yesterday. And I'm linking the two because there are some commonalities between a science fiction movie made in 1956 and a science fiction movie sequel made in 2024. And I'm going to make those links. So let's get started with the first one. Denis Villeneuve's 2024 Dune Part 2 stars Timothée Chalamet, Stellan Skarsgård, Rebecca Ferguson, Christopher Walken playing Emperor Shaddam IV, Florence Pugh, and Taylor-Joy turns up as somebody who hasn't been born yet, Austin Butler playing Paved Ralpha, and Dave Bautista playing the Beast Raban. Now, if you haven't seen the first one, you should. Don't go into the second one and go, I don't understand what's happening. You've been warned. Part 2 means Part 2. It's a continuation of the same story. Not all of the loose ends get tied up at the end of this one. It's an ongoing saga, and the pre-sales on Dune Part 2 were better than Oppenheimer's. Got a little bit of an idea it's going to do okay at the box office. So if you haven't clocked this one, watch it first. Not going to regret it. And by the way, as soon as possible, I'm getting Part 2 on 4K because it's one of the most beautiful looking science fiction movies I have ever seen. And I'm including Flesh Gordon in that. So it's the continuation of the story of House Atreides and Paul Atreides, the sole surviving son of House Atreides. His mother Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, who's a Bene Gesserit and becomes a Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit in the course of this movie. The movie shows you how that happens and how the water of life is got from adolescent sandworms. Very cool stuff. So we see Paul and Jessica in the deserts of Arrakis with the Fremen, including Chani, played by Zendaya, who Paul has fallen in love with, while House Harkonnen has taken over the planet, which is the source of the all-important spice, a drug which enables interstellar travel, as well as a whole bunch of other useful things for the powers that be, being the great houses of the Empire. The Fremen are fighting a guerrilla war against the Harkonnens and doing very well with it. They're using their environment, and the fact that they have enormous sandworms as a part of their environment holds them in good stead. The sandworms are fantastic in this. When you see anybody riding a sandworm, it's all done as practical effects, and that really works. It gives it a sense of reality, and the fact that the Fremen use the sandworms as a transportation system is extra cool. On the Harkonnen side of things, you've got Vladimir Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, who is pretty much Bibi Netanyahu covered in oil. And by the way, there are a lot of parallels with very, very recent events on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. So you might want to make those parallels if you're so inclined. But those parallels were very obvious to me when I was watching the movie. The movie runs 168 minutes and goes pretty fast for that. The action scenes are fantastically shot. Denis Villeneuve and his cinematographer Greg Fraser. Villeneuve and Fraser use some really interesting techniques. They use really shallow depth of field in big landscape shots to isolate usually Paul Atreides from a crowd scene in a very effective way. They use tilt shifting to make the scenes look more monumental. Tilt shifting is that thing where you blur the top and the bottom of a screen to make the stuff in the middle look like a toy. And that works really well too. It's not overused, but there are a number of different cinematic techniques that make this movie look something special, and it's always done to emphasize a point and to draw your attention to a certain part of sometimes very chaotic scenes. But this movie has been compared to a lot of other films. Lawrence of Arabia is pretty much the obvious one, and I can see that because, like Lawrence, Paul Atreides is very much an anti-hero. He's not a good guy. He's not your viewpoint character in a sense. He's your viewpoint character, but he's not a viewpoint character with whom you as an audience member will always agree. He does some stuff towards the end of the film, which leads into the next film, which in a conventional Hollywood narrative alienates a certain audience which is programmed for that kind of a narrative. Not going to tell you what that is, but it is shocking to some people. Austin Butler playing Paved Ralpha is fantastic. He almost makes you forget Sting playing Paved in the David Lynch 1984 version of Dune. And his Paved Ralpha is bred to be a monster. He's bred by the Bene Gesserit to be a superhuman monster. And the fight scenes that Austin Butler does as Paved Ralpha are incredibly visceral, and the fight scene between Paul and Paved is done in a very tight way. There are lots of mid shots, there are some close-ups, but there's no shaky cam or any of those other tricks which has often been used by various filmmakers in tight, fast action scenes. You don't get any of that in this. You get good, honest fight scenes. And because it's usually done with a knife or a sword, there is that extra frisson. Fight scenes where people are shooting at each other rarely have the impact of the idea of somebody putting a length of steel through somebody else. There is a visceral frisson that people get watching that kind of thing, particularly when somebody they like is either skewered or cut. Zendaya does a good job as Chani, and Timothée Chalamet as Paul really comes into his own. His character goes through a lot of changes in this one, and Chalamet carries it. The middle-aged good girl and I just watched him in Wonka, and Chalamet was good playing the over-top, exuberant Willy Wonka, and his Paul Atreides is very, very different from that. This guy is an actor to watch. Even though he does look like a twink, he's got the balls of a much older and wiser actor, and there's chops to have a long and quite distinguished career if he chooses to do so. Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica does really well. She gets some scenes of her own, and Zendaya as Chani also does. We've also got Josh Brolin playing Gurney Halleck, and Florence Pugh playing Princess Irulan, the Emperor's daughter. Some of the man babies online have complained that Chani gets more to do in this movie, and she becomes, for a time at least, a moral compass for Paul, and her insights and her viewpoint are honoured in the movie. And a lot of man babies have said, no, this is Paul's story, it's all about a messiah. Giving more space to female characters is going to ruin the whole movie. It doesn't. It actually makes it a more nuanced and complex film than it will be without the agency of Chani and without the agency of Jessica Atreides. One of the other things I like is Dave Bautista playing against type, even though physically his Raban is right for Dave Bautista to play. Raban's hopeless. He's a horrible strategist. He's useless at his job of keeping the spice flowing off planet while the Harkonnens rule the northern hemisphere of Arrakis, and he just keeps redoubling his efforts when they're not doing any good. And Dave Bautista gives us a complexity and a helplessness to this monstrous character which really works. He is a good actor, unlike many other wrestler-turned actors. There's so much to love in this movie. The cinematography, the story, the acting, the characters, particularly the costume design is wonderful. If you compare and contrast the costume design of, say, the Fremen and then the Harkonnens, where the Harkonnens all have an industrial look to their clothing, it's really interesting. And the Emperor's clothing and Princess Irulan's clothing and the Sardaukar Emperor Guard, their clothing compared to the Fremen in their battle gear. It's just a beautifully designed movie in every way. And also the props and the machinery, the spice harvesters, the warships, the weapons used, and the way that the weapons manifest their use is terrific. I love this movie. And that's where I'm going to do a compare and contrast with the 1956 film, Forbidden Planet. I rewatched Forbidden Planet yesterday, along with its sequel, The Invisible Boy. And if you don't think that the sequel is a sequel, watch the first 10 minutes of it. It is definitely a sly little sequel to Forbidden Planet. And I watched a lot of the extras on the Blu-ray of Forbidden Planet. And one of the things I got, which is a theme and an approach, which also applies to Dune and Dune Part 2, is know your genre well and respect the genre. And both those movies did that. Forbidden Planet wasn't in the wheelhouse of MGM in the 1950s. They were the guys who did big budget musicals. And suddenly they've got a science fiction film on their hands. And the production crew spent a lot of money before the budgetary guys caught up with them. So they ended up doing a much larger scale picture than they would have otherwise, because they'd already half finished the picture before the budget guys said you spent too much money. That doesn't work in modern times, but I love the fact that it worked then. And so they got those enormous cyclorama backgrounds for Altair 4. They got Robbie the Robot done. They got all of the really cool stuff because the production decided to go big. And at the start of the film, Leslie Nielsen has said at the start of the film, all of the cast and crew were brought together. And the director, Fred Wilcox, said, we're taking this seriously. It's not a silly movie. We're taking this movie seriously as a piece of drama. And so that was underlined right from the start of production. And I love that. Again, that's something that the two Dune movies have. That honesty and that regard for the genre in which you are working. You're putting in long hours, you're putting in a lot of money, you're putting in sleepless nights and tons of effort. And too often, science fiction movies and other movies of various types don't respect and honor the genre. And that is always a mistake, because a perceptive audience knows when you're just ticking boxes and doing things because you think they're going to look pretty and they're going to have lots of bang bang zoom zoom in them. Every bit of bang bang zoom zoom in the Dune movies has a purpose and a visceral impact, and the sound design is marvelous too. I saw it in the cinema with Dolby Atmos sound, and the sound design right from the very first moments of the movie had a visceral impact to it. It is beautifully done. It is done to really salient purpose. Apart from the man babies not liking the agency of the female characters in the movie, I haven't heard anything bad about Dune Part 2. And I like that. It shows that they're doing a lot right. And they're giving us a movie which isn't reliant on Star Wars and isn't reliant on Star Trek and isn't reliant on 50 other movies of the past, even though it does have some parallels with things like Lawrence of Arabia. As I said, Dune Part 2 and Dune Part 1 are very much their own thing. Now, I know a lot of you are going to see it, and a lot of you I know will love it, and I'm glad that you do. I'm hoping that this kind of movie doing really well leads to a renaissance of quality science fiction. Maybe looking back on things. I know this week they've announced that they're doing a streaming series of the cyberpunk novel Neuromancer. Finally getting that off the ground, William Gibson's Neuromancer. Whether they do it well or not, I don't know, but they're going to. And I like that, because that is in, I think, late 1970s, one of the science fiction novels that changed science fiction for the better. So we're living in, I hope, a renewed golden age of good science fiction, as opposed to two-dimensional, kiddie-friendly science fiction, which has been the curse of the genre since the 1970s. So check out Dune 2. Have a good time with it. Just sit back and watch every luscious detail of it, and you're going to have a good time. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, look at the playlists of previous videos. You can donate to the channel at the channel on YouTube, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. And you also get access to my very eclectic monthly Spotify playlist for my patrons. So until next time, watch some good movies. This time around, don't watch bad movies. Just watch good movies. Just really luxuriate. Make your movie viewing like a hot bath with lots of bubbles in it for yourself. And I'll catch you next time.